While the Spitfire captured headlines and imaginations with its elegant elliptical wings and dazzling performance, another fighter was doing the unglamorous, essential work attacking bomber formations head-on, absorbing battle damage that would have destroyed its more celebrated stablemate, and returning to base to be patched up and sent aloft again within hours. By August 1940, this workhorse equipped 32 RAF squadrons compared to just 19 flying Spitfires. It would claim 55% of all enemy aircraft destroyed during Britain's darkest hour. Yet within just 4 years of that triumph, it would be dismissed as outdated, relegated to secondary theaters, and largely forgotten by history. That aircraft was the Hawker Hurricane. This is the story of aviation's most underestimated fighter, a machine that succeeded not despite its conventional design, but because of it. To understand why the Hurricane became what it was, we must return to the mid-1930s when the Royal Air Force was still flying biplanes and the idea of war with Germany seemed distant, if not impossible. In 1933, the Air Ministry issued Specification FIO.7/30, calling for a new fighter capable of exceeding 250 miles per hour. It was a modest requirement by later standards, but revolutionary for an Air Force still equipped with fabric-covered biplanes like the Gloucester Gauntlet, which could barely manage 230 miles per hour in a dive. At Hawker Aircraft's Kingston facility, chief designer Sidney Cam, a brilliant, occasionally cantankerous engineer who had already given the RAF the elegant Hawker Fury biplane, began working on a monoplane fighter. His initial submission, the Hawker PV.3, was essentially a monoplane version of the Fury, retaining the steel tubular frame construction that Hawker had perfected over the previous decade. The design that emerged was conservative by contemporary standards. While other manufacturers experimented with stress-skin metal construction, Cam stuck with what he knew worked: a Warren truss structure of steel tubes, bolted and braced, covered with fabric over wooden formers. The wings initially used the same approach, 2 steel spars with fabric covering. What's remarkable is that Camo was designing an obsolete aircraft from the start, or so it appeared. But Sidney Cam understood something that more adventurous designers did not: that the RAF would need fighters quickly, in large numbers, and that those fighters would need to be maintained by mechanics familiar with traditional construction techniques. The critical breakthrough came in 1934 when Rolls-Royce began development of their new PV-12 engine, later named the Merlin. This liquid-cooled V-12 promised over 1,000 horsepower, nearly double what existing fighters could muster. Cam immediately redesigned his fighter around this new power plant. On the 21st of February 1935, the Air Ministry issued a revised specification F.36/34, which incorporated many features Cam had already designed into his aircraft: a top speed exceeding 300 miles per hour, and critically, an armament of 8 303 Browning machine guns, 4 times the firepower of existing fighters. The prototype, registered K5083, was completed in October 1935. On the 6th of November, Hawker's chief test pilot, Flight Lieutenant Paul Ward Spencer-Bullman, lifted the aircraft off the grass at Brooklands for its maiden flight. The flight lasted just 15 minutes, but it was immediately clear that the Hurricane, though it wouldn't receive that name officially until June 1936, was something special. Testing revealed a docile, forgiving aircraft with exceptional handling qualities. Unlike more high-strung designs, the Hurricane was stable as a gun platform, recovered easily from stalls, and demanded little from its pilot. These characteristics would prove invaluable in combat when exhausted pilots with minimal training would be thrown into battle. However, the prototype's performance initially disappointed, with the early Merlin C producing just 990 horsepower and driving a 2-bladed wooden propeller. The Hurricane managed only 315 miles per hour, respectable but hardly revolutionary. The fabric-covered wings also limited diving speed to around 380 miles per hour as the fabric began rippling at higher speeds. Hawker's solution was pragmatic. By mid-1936, they had developed metal-skinned wings with flush riveting, which not only increased diving speed to 460 miles per hour, but also provided stronger attachment points for the 8 Browning machine guns. The great advantage of these metal-covered wings was their ability to withstand far greater stress loads without requiring substantial structural reinforcement. Production began in June 1936, remarkably before the Air Ministry had even placed a formal order. Hawker was taking an enormous financial risk, but the gamble paid off. The Air Ministry ordered 600 Hurricanes in June 1936, the largest single order for military aircraft Britain had ever placed. The first production Hurricane, L-1547, flew on the 12th of October 1937. By December, No. 111 Squadron at RAF Northolt received their first aircraft, making the Hurricane the RAF's first monoplane fighter and the first to exceed 300 miles per hour in level flight. The squadron's commanding officer remarked that transitioning from the Gloucester Gauntlet biplane to the Hurricane was like stepping from a bicycle to a motorcycle, yet even as production accelerated, questions lingered. The Hurricane's tubular frame and partially fabric-covered fuselage seemed archaic compared to all-metal designs emerging elsewhere. The Supermarine Spitfire, which first flew in March 1936, featured advanced stressed skin construction and promised superior performance. Some critics suggested that Hurricane production should be curtailed in favor of the more modern design. What they failed to appreciate was that the Hurricane's conventional construction was actually a strength. It required 10,000 man-hours to build a Hurricane compared to 15,000 for a Spitfire. Repairs could be accomplished by furniture makers and coach builders with minimal training. Battle damage that would write off a Spitfire could be patched overnight on a Hurricane. By September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, the RAF had 18 Hurricane squadrons operational compared to just 9 Spitfire squadrons. This numerical advantage would prove decisive in the coming trial. The Hurricane's operational debut came not over Britain but over France. On the 30th of October 1939, Hurricane P2617 of 1 Squadron, flown by Flying Officer Peter Boymold, shot down a Dornier Dua-17, the RAF's first confirmed kill of the Second World War. Through the phony war winter of 1939-40, Hurricane squadrons gained valuable experience over France, developing tactics and discovering their aircraft's capabilities. Pilots quickly learned that the Hurricane couldn't match the Messerschmitt Bf-109E in speed or climb rate, but it could turn inside the German fighter and, crucially, absorb tremendous punishment. When the German blitzkrieg erupted in May 1940, Hurricane squadrons bore the brunt of the air fighting. The results were sobering. Against the well-trained Luftwaffe, Hurricane losses mounted alarmingly. During the evacuation from Dunkirk, Hurricanes provided air cover, but by the end of May, Fighter Command had lost 386 Hurricanes, nearly one-third of its entire strength. However, what would happen next would transform the Hurricane from a promising fighter into a legend. The Battle of Britain officially began on the 10th of July 1940. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, commanding Fighter Command, deployed his forces according to a deliberate strategy. Spitfire squadrons, with their superior high-altitude performance, would engage the Bf-109 escorts. Hurricane squadrons would attack the bomber formations. It was the perfect role for the Hurricane. The thick wing section that limited its top speed also made it an exceptionally stable gun platform. The 8.303 Browning machine guns, though individually less powerful than cannon, created a devastating cone of fire when harmonized at 250 yards. Against the Heinkel He-111, Dornier Do-17, and Junkers Ju-88 bombers, this firepower was lethal. Consider a typical engagement on the 15th of August 1940, the Luftwaffe's maximum effort, subsequently known as Black Thursday. Over Tyneside, Hurricanes of 605 Squadron intercepted a formation of Junkers Ju-88S, escorted by Messerschmitt Bf-110S. Squadron leader Archie McKellar led his pilots straight through the escort, ignoring the Bf-110S, and tore into the bomber formation. In minutes, 8 Ju-88S were shot down without British loss. This was the Hurricane's war, head-on attacks against bomber formations, absorbing defensive fire from dozens of machine guns, pressing attacks to point-blank range, then diving away before the escorts could react. The statistics are revealing. According to RAF records, Hurricanes accounted for 55% of all enemy aircraft claimed destroyed during the Battle of Britain, approximately 1,593 victories compared to 924 by Spitfires. Remarkably, this was achieved despite the Hurricane's inferior performance compared to both the Spitfire and the Bf-109E. The key to this success lay in the Hurricane's strengths. As one pilot noted, the Hurricane had an altogether exceptional combination of maneuverability, rugged strength, stability, ease of control and gun aiming, and viceless landing characteristics, which went far towards offsetting the fact that its climb, level, and altitude performance was slightly lower than the Spitfire and Mi-109. That rugged strength was no exaggeration. The tubular steel frame could absorb cannon strikes that would shred an all-metal monocoque structure. The fabric covering was easily patched. Pilots reported limping home with dozens of bullet holes, damage that would have been catastrophic in other designs. Wing Commander Robert Stanford Tuck, who flew both types during the battle, observed, "The Hurricane was a solid, dependable gun platform. You could throw it around the sky and it would always respond. Not as glamorous as the Spit, perhaps, but when you needed to shoot something down, you wanted a Hurricane." By September 1940, as the battle reached its climax, Hurricane squadrons were being rotated through the front line at a punishing pace. No 303 Polish squadron flying Hurricanes became the highest-scoring RAF squadron of the battle with 126 confirmed kills. Many of these pilots had escaped occupied Poland, and they flew with a fury that terrified Luftwaffe crews. But there was a cost. Hurricane losses were severe. Against Bf 109 escorts, the Hurricane was at a distinct disadvantage. Tactics evolved accordingly. Hurricane pilots learned to attack, shoot, and dive away immediately using their superior diving speed to escape pursuit. Dogfighting with Bf 109S was avoided whenever possible. By October 1940, as the Battle of Britain wound down, the Hurricane's limitations were becoming apparent. The Bf 109F, which would appear in 1941, would widen the performance gap further. It was clear that the Hurricane's days as a frontline fighter over England were numbered. Remarkably, this was not the end of the Hurricane story, but the beginning of its global career. From 1941 onward, Hurricanes fought in virtually every theater of the Second World War, often in roles far removed from its original purpose. In the deserts of North Africa, Hurricanes equipped with Vokes air filters battled Italian and German fighters in brutal conditions. The Hurricane proved superbly suited to desert operations. Its rugged construction stood up to sand and heat, and battle damage could be repaired in the field with minimal equipment. During the siege of Malta, Hurricanes became the island's primary defense against relentless Axis bombing. The first pair of Hurricanes arrived on the 21st of June 1940, accompanied by a Hudson. Throughout 1941 and 1942, Hurricane squadrons fought desperately to keep Malta operational, often outnumbered 10-1. The Hurricane's durability was critical. Aircraft damaged in morning combat were often repaired and flying again by afternoon. In the Far East, Hurricanes faced the formidable Japanese Zero. Here, the Hurricane's shortcomings were brutally exposed. The Zero outclassed the Hurricane in nearly every performance parameter. Yet even here, the Hurricane found a role. In Burma, Hurricane squadrons adapted to ground attack, bombing and strafing Japanese positions with considerable success, which brings us to perhaps the Hurricane's most remarkable incarnation, the Tank Buster. In 1942, Hawker developed the Hurricane Mech IID, armed with 240mm Vickers S cannons in underwing pods. Each cannon carried just 15 rounds, but the tungsten-cored shells could penetrate the top armor of any German tank. On the 6th of June 1942, No. 6 Squadron deployed to North Africa with these aircraft painted in desert camouflage and tasked with hunting panzers. The results were spectacular. Flying at extremely low altitude, often below 50 feet, Hurricane tank busters would approach German armored columns, pop up just long enough to fire a burst, then dive back to ground level. At the Battle of Alamein in October 1942, No. 6 Squadron claimed dozens of German tanks destroyed. The Germans nicknamed the aircraft flying can openers. However, flying tank busters was desperately dangerous. The 40mm cannons imposed a significant performance penalty, reducing speed to around 280 miles per hour. Pilots had to approach within 800 yards to ensure hits, flying through intense anti-aircraft fire. Loss rates were severe. One pilot recalled, "You had about 3 seconds to line up, fire, and get out. If you hesitated, you were dead." Meanwhile, Hurricane production continued with numerous variants. The Mech 1 Thai became a hurry bomber, carrying two 250-pound or 500-pound bombs for ground attack. The Mech 1 Thai mounted 420mm Hispano cannons, devastating firepower. Though the increased weight reduced performance further, the Mech 4 could carry rockets, bombs, or long-range fuel tanks, becoming a versatile ground attack platform. In the Soviet Union, Britain supplied 2,834 Hurricanes under Lend-Lease. Soviet pilots had mixed feelings about the aircraft. It was inferior to their own Yak-1 and RAF fighters in performance, but they appreciated its robust construction and heavy firepower. Soviet Hurricanes fought on the Northern Front, protecting the vital Arctic convoys and in the defense of Moscow. Production numbers tell the story of the Hurricane's importance. By the time production ceased in September 1944, a total of 14,533 Hurricanes had been built, approximately 10,000 more than the Spitfire by the same date. Canadian Car and Foundry produced 1,451 Hurricanes in Canada, while Austin Motors and Gloucester Aircraft manufactured thousands more in Britain. Yet by mid-1943, the Hurricane's frontline service over Europe was essentially over. The newer Hawker Typhoon, despite its own teething troubles, offered far superior performance. Spitfire variants had evolved to dominate the skies over Northwest Europe. The Hurricane increasingly found itself relegated to training units, meteorological reconnaissance, and second-line duties. The Hurricane's last major combat operation in Europe came in June 1944, when rocket-armed Hurricane Mech 4s provided ground attack support during the Normandy invasion. Even here, they were secondary to Typhoons and Tempests. The era of the Hurricane as a combat aircraft was drawing to a close. The final operational sortie by an RAF Hurricane Squadron occurred in early 1947, when No. 6 Squadron flew their last mission in Palestine. Nearly 10 years after entering service, the Hurricane was finally retired from frontline duty. So how do we assess the Hawker Hurricane? Was it truly obsolete from the start, as some critics suggest? Or was it precisely the right aircraft at the right time? The answer, as is so often the case, is nuanced. By any objective measure of performance, speed, climb rate, ceiling, maneuverability, the Hurricane was inferior to its primary opponent, the Messerschmitt Bf 109. From the moment it entered service, it was also outclassed by its stablemate, the Spitfire, in almost every category except perhaps stability and ease of handling. Yet the Hurricane achieved something that more advanced designs could not. It was available in sufficient numbers when Britain desperately needed fighters. Those 14,533 Hurricanes represented thousands more aircraft than could have been produced had the RAF insisted on all-metal high-performance designs. In 1940, quantity had its own quality. The Hurricane's conventional construction, derided by some as outdated, proved to be a hidden strength. Battle damage that would ground a Spitfire for weeks could be repaired on a Hurricane in days, sometimes hours. In the pressure cooker environment of 1940, when Fighter Command was desperately short of serviceable aircraft, this maintainability was priceless. Moreover, the Hurricane's forgiving handling characteristics meant that pilots with minimal training could fly it competently. In contrast, the Spitfire demanded respect and skill in the hands of an inexperienced pilot. It could be unforgiving. When Britain was rapidly training new pilots to replace losses, the Hurricane's docility was a significant advantage. There's also a common misconception that needs correcting. The Hurricane was not built of wood. The fuselage structure was steel tube, exceptionally strong and fire-resistant. Only the wings used fabric covering in early models, and this was replaced with metal skinning from 1939 onward. The myth of the wooden Hurricane persists, but it's just that, a myth. Today, the Hurricane's legacy lives on, though it remains overshadowed by the Spitfire. Of the 14,533 produced, only about 16 remain in airworthy condition worldwide, with perhaps another 30 preserved in museums. The RAF Battle of Britain Memorial Flight operates 2 Hurricanes, LF 363 and PZ 865, keeping the type's memory alive at air shows across Britain. Several museums preserve important examples. The RAF Museum at Hendon displays L1592, one of the last fabric-winged Hurricanes, and a Battle of Britain veteran. The Imperial War Museum Duxford houses several Hurricanes, including a Canadian-built example. In the United States, the National Air and Space Museum preserves a Mech 1Th. The Hurricane's historical significance cannot be overstated. Without it, Britain's defense in 1940 would have been impossible. The Spitfire, for all its virtues, existed in insufficient numbers. The Hurricane squadrons did the heavy lifting, attacking bomber formations, absorbing losses, and returning day after day until the Luftwaffe abandoned its daylight offensive. In evaluating the Hurricane, we must resist the temptation to judge it solely by performance specifications. Yes, it was slower than the Bauer 109. Yes, it was less glamorous than the Spitfire, but it was reliable, rugged, available in quantity, and effective in its assigned role. In 1940, those qualities mattered more than a few extra miles per hour. The quiet success of the Hawker Hurricane lies in this paradox. An aircraft that appeared obsolete when designed became indispensable when tested in combat. Sidney Cam's conservative design choices, the traditional construction, the thick wing, the emphasis on stability over speed were vindicated by war. In the end, the Hurricane's legacy is one of workmanlike competence rather than glamorous achievement. It was never the fastest, never the most advanced, never the most celebrated, but it was there when needed, performing unglamorous but essential work day after day in every theater of war, And perhaps that's the highest praise we can give any warplane. Not that it was perfect, but that it was exactly what was needed when it was needed most. The Hurricane didn't win the war alone, but without it, the war might very well have been lost. That distinction deserves to be remembered.